Jessica had been dreaming about this moment for 5 long years. Standing in front of her brand new ranch house, keys still warm in her palm, she couldn't help but smile. The house was everything she had pictured during those countless nights of saving every penny from her graphic design business. The moving truck had just left and boxes were stacked everywhere inside. But Jessica didn't care about the mess. She walked through each room slowly, running her fingers along the walls she now owned. The master bedroom had huge windows that let in beautiful morning light. The kitchen had granite counters and enough space for the big family dinners she hoped to host someday. And the backyard? It was perfect for her 2 rescue dogs, Max and Bella, who were already running around exploring their new territory. Willowbrook Estates was exactly the kind of neighborhood Jessica had always wanted to live in. The houses were well-maintained, the streets were clean, and everything looked picture-perfect. She had beaten out 3 other buyers to get this house, and honestly, she still couldn't believe it was really hers. The first few days were like a honeymoon period. Jessica spent hours arranging furniture and hanging pictures. She even started a small garden by the front porch, making sure to check the HOA rules first. Everything had to be just right in a community like this, and she wanted to be the perfect neighbor. Her next-door neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, came over with fresh cookies on Jessica's 3rd day. They chatted over the fence about the best local coffee shops and where to get groceries. 2 houses down, the Johnsons waved every morning when Jessica left for work. Everything felt warm and welcoming. Then Jessica met Karen. It was a sunny Saturday morning when the doorbell rang. Jessica opened the door to find a woman in her early 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that seemed a little too bright. She was holding a thick folder and wearing a blazer that probably cost more than Jessica's monthly car payment. "Hello there. I'm Karen Blackwood, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association," the woman announced, extending her hand. "I wanted to personally welcome you to our lovely community." Jessica invited her in for coffee, thinking this was just a friendly neighborhood visit. Karen accepted eagerly, her eyes immediately scanning every corner of Jessica's living room. She made comments about the high ceilings, the hardwood floors, and how spacious everything was. "My goodness, this house is just enormous," Karen said, settling into the couch with her coffee cup. "It's one of our largest floor plans. 4 bedrooms, right? And that beautiful master suite upstairs?" Jessica nodded, still trying to be polite. "Yes, I love how open everything feels. I've wanted a house like this since I was little." Karen's smile twitched slightly. "Well, isn't that nice? Though I have to wonder, it's just you living here, correct? No husband or children?" The question felt oddly personal, but Jessica answered anyway. "Just me and my 2 dogs for now, but I'm hoping to start a family in the next few years." "Ah, hoping," Karen repeated as if the word left a bad taste in her mouth. "Well, you know, it's quite a responsibility, maintaining a property this size. The HOA has very strict standards, and larger homes require more attention to detail." She opened her thick folder and pulled out what looked like a small book. "These are our community guidelines. I'm sure your realtor mentioned them, but I like to go over the important points with new residents personally." For the next hour, Karen went through rule after rule. The grass had to be cut to exactly 2.5 inches. Garden decorations needed pre-approval. Cars couldn't be parked on the street for more than 4 hours. The list seemed endless. "Now I hope you don't mind me asking," Karen said, leaning forward with that too bright smile again. "But what line of work are you in?" "Houses in Willowbrook. Estates are quite an investment, especially for someone so young." Jessica felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I run my own graphic design business. I've been saving for this house for years." "How impressive," Karen replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "And you felt you needed quite this much space for your business?" Before Jessica could answer, Karen stood up and walked to the large picture window overlooking the backyard. "You know, this house has such wonderful family potential. The previous owners, the Hendersons, raised 3 beautiful children here. It's really meant for a growing family." Jessica joined her at the window, watching Max and Bella chase each other around the yard. "Well, like I said, I'm hoping to have a family someday." "Someday?" Karen repeated again, that strange tone creeping back into her voice. You know, I have a son, Brandon. He's 28 and just graduated from business school. He's been looking for the perfect place to settle down and start his own family. She turned to face Jessica directly. He actually looked at this house when it first went on the market, but the timing wasn't quite right. Such a shame, really. It would have been perfect for him. Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. Something about the way Karen was looking at her made her uncomfortable. Well, I'm sure he'll find something wonderful. The market has lots of great options. Karen's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. Yes, I'm sure. He will. Though nothing quite compares to this place, does it? After Karen left, Jessica tried to shake off the weird feeling their conversation had given her. She told herself she was overthinking things. Karen was probably just being friendly in her own way. Maybe she was protective of the neighborhood and wanted to make sure new residents understood the rules. But over the next few weeks, Jessica noticed Karen walking past her house more often than seemed normal. Sometimes she would slow down and look directly into the windows. Once, Jessica caught her standing in the driveway, pointing out different features of the house to a young man who must have been her son, Brandon. When Jessica waved from the window, Karen waved back cheerfully, as if nothing strange was happening at all. But the young man looked embarrassed and quickly walked away. Jessica started getting letters in her mailbox. Official-looking notices on HOA letterhead, pointing out tiny violations. Her mailbox was apparently 2 inches too far to the left. The small garden gnome she'd bought was not on the pre-approved decoration list. Her trash cans were positioned incorrectly on pickup day. Each violation came with a detailed explanation and a threat of fines, if not corrected within 48 hours. Jessica fixed everything immediately, not wanting any trouble. But the letters kept coming. Her doormat was the wrong color. Her porch light wasn't the approved style. The bird feeder in her backyard was too close to the property line. Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned one afternoon that she'd never seen so many violation notices for one house. Karen's usually pretty reasonable, she said, looking puzzled. I've lived here 8 years and maybe gotten 2 letters total. That evening, Jessica sat in her beautiful living room, looking through all the violation notices. Something was definitely wrong. These weren't normal, welcome to the neighborhood interactions. This felt personal. She thought about Karen's visit, the pointed questions about the house being too big for just one person, and the comments about her son needing a place to start his family. A terrible suspicion began forming in her mind. Karen didn't just want Jessica to follow the HOA rules. She wanted Jessica gone. Jessica thought the violation notices would stop once she fixed everything Karen had pointed out. She was wrong. If anything, they got worse. Every few days, another official-looking letter appeared in her mailbox. Her car was parked 3 inches, too close to the curb. The color of her welcome mat didn't match the approved palette. Her porch furniture wasn't positioned correctly according to the community aesthetic guidelines. The letters were getting more ridiculous by the week. One complained that her dogs were barking too much, even though Max and Bella were some of the quietest dogs in the neighborhood. Another claimed her outdoor lights were too bright and disturbed the neighbors, despite being the exact same fixtures everyone else had. Jessica started taking photos of everything. Her car's position, her decorations, even her trash cans on pickup day. She had a feeling she would need proof that she wasn't actually violating anything. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. Jessica was working from home, focused on a big project for a client when her doorbell rang. She opened the door to find Karen standing there with that same bright smile, but this time she wasn't alone. Good morning, Jessica. I hope you don't mind the surprise visit. This is my son Brandon that I told you about. The young man standing beside Karen looked deeply uncomfortable. He was tall with dark hair and seemed like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. He gave Jessica a quick, apologetic wave. Mom, I really don't think we should be bothering her while she's working, Brandon said quietly. Karen ignored him completely. Oh, nonsense. Jessica won't mind. We were just taking a walk around the neighborhood and I wanted to show Brandon some of the beautiful homes we have here. But they weren't just walking. Karen was pointing directly at different parts of Jessica's house, talking about the kitchen windows, the front porch, and how perfect the layout was for entertaining. She was practically giving a real estate tour of Jessica's property while standing in her driveway. "The master bedroom has such wonderful natural light," Karen was saying to Brandon, gesturing toward the upstairs windows. "And that backyard is just perfect for children to play in." Jessica felt her stomach drop. "Can I help you with something, Karen?" Karen's smile got even brighter, which somehow made it more unsettling. "Actually, yes. I've been thinking about our conversation from a few weeks ago. You mentioned you're hoping to start a family someday, and it got me thinking." She stepped closer, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "Brandon here is getting married next spring. He and his fiancée are looking for their first home, and they need something with plenty of space for the children they're planning." Brandon's face turned red. "Mom, please stop." But Karen kept going. "I couldn't help but notice how much house you have here for just one person. Don't you think it might make more sense for you to find something more suitable? Something smaller, maybe a nice condo or townhouse?" Jessica stared at her, hardly believing what she was hearing. "Are you suggesting I should sell my house?" "Well, not exactly suggesting," Karen replied, still smiling. "More like thinking out loud about what might work best for everyone. You could find a lovely smaller place that's easier to maintain, and Brandon could have the space he needs for his growing family." "I love my house," Jessica said firmly. "I worked very hard to buy it, and I have no intention of selling it." Karen's smile faltered for just a second. "Oh, I'm sure you do love it, but sometimes what we want isn't what's best for the community as a whole. Willowbrook Estates is really designed for families with children. There's nothing in the HOA rules that says single people can't live here." Jessica replied, her voice getting stronger. "Well, no, not in writing," Karen admitted. "But there's an unspoken understanding about the kind of community we're trying to maintain here." Brandon looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. "Mom, we need to go. Now." Karen finally seemed to notice her son's discomfort. "Of course, dear. Jessica, I hope you'll think about what I've said. I'm only trying to help everyone find their perfect place." After they left, Jessica stood in her doorway for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. Karen had basically told her to move out of her own house so her son could have it. The audacity was breathtaking. That evening, Jessica called her sister Lisa to vent about the situation. She said, "What?" Lisa's voice came through the phone, incredulous. "She wants me to sell my house so her son can buy it. She made it sound like I'm being selfish by living there alone." "That's insane," Lisa said. "You can't let her bully you like this." "I'm not planning to, but I'm worried about what she might do next. These violation notices are getting out of hand, and now she's involving her son. Document everything," Lisa advised. "Take pictures, save all the letters, write down what she said today. If this gets worse, you might need evidence." Jessica was grateful for her sister's advice, but she hoped it wouldn't come to that. Surely Karen would back off once she realized Jessica wasn't going anywhere. She was wrong again. The very next day, Jessica found a new violation notice in her mailbox. This one claimed she was violating the guest parking policy because her friend had stayed overnight the weekend before. Jessica read it 3 times, confused. She didn't even know there was a guest parking policy. She dug out her HOA handbook and searched through every page. There was no guest parking policy listed anywhere. Over the next week, the notices became more frequent and more bizarre. Her flower garden was apparently creating a visual disturbance. Her dogs were disrupting the neighborhood peace by existing. One letter even claimed that Jessica's work-from-home business was violating residential zoning laws. Jessica researched every single claim and found that none of them were legitimate. Karen was making things up. The situation escalated further when Jessica came home from the grocery store to find Karen and Brandon standing in her backyard, looking through her patio doors. "Excuse me," Jessica called out, hurrying over with her grocery bags. "What are you doing back here?" Karen turned around, completely unfazed by being caught trespassing. "Oh, hello, dear. I was just showing Brandon the layout of the backyard. The previous owners had such a lovely garden set up back here." "This is my private property," Jessica said, trying to keep her voice calm. "You can't just walk around back here without permission." "Oh, I'm sorry if I overstepped," Karen replied, though she didn't sound sorry at all. I'm just so excited about the possibility of Brandon moving into the neighborhood. This house would be absolutely perfect for him and his fiancée. Brandon looked mortified. Mom, we need to leave right now. This is completely inappropriate. And a dice. They walked away. Jessica heard Brandon having a heated, whispered conversation with his mother. She couldn't make out the words, but his body language made it clear he was upset. That night, Jessica couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Karen's words about the house being perfect for Brandon. The way Karen had said possibility made it sound like she actually expected this to happen. Jessica realized she was dealing with someone who truly believed she could force her out of her own home. The violation notices, the unexpected visits, the property tours in her driveway. It was all part of a calculated campaign to make her life miserable until she gave up and moved. But Jessica had worked too hard and dreamed too long to give up. Now, she loved her house, her neighborhood, and her new life. If Karen wanted a fight, she was about to get one. The next morning, Jessica started her own documentation project. She set up a security camera by her front door and began keeping a detailed log of every interaction with Karen. She had a feeling she was going to need all the evidence she could get. Jessica's new security camera caught more than she expected. Within just 3 days, she had footage of Karen walking past her house at least twice every morning and evening. But it wasn't just casual strolls. Karen would slow down, stop in front of Jessica's driveway, and take pictures with her phone. The violation notices were now coming almost daily. Jessica's mailbox was becoming a constant source of stress. One morning, she found 3 separate letters. One complained that her recycling bin was visible from the street for more than the allowed time. Another claimed her outdoor doormat had faded and needed immediate replacement. The third one was the most ridiculous yet. It stated that her house numbers were positioned 2 degrees off-center from the approved alignment. Jessica measured everything with a ruler and level. Her house numbers were perfectly straight. Karen was literally making things up now. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon. Jessica was in her home office working on a logo design for a new client when she heard voices outside. She looked out her window and saw Karen standing in her front yard with 2 other women she didn't recognize. See how the landscaping doesn't quite match the community standards, Karen was saying, pointing at Jessica's perfectly maintained flower garden. And those outdoor light fixtures? They're not from the approved vendor list. Jessica had enough. She marched outside, her heart pounding with anger and frustration. Excuse me, Karen. What are you doing in my yard? Karen turned around with that fake smile. Oh, hello, Jessica. I was just showing Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Williams around the neighborhood. They're thinking of moving to Willowbrook Estates. One of the women looked embarrassed. We were just looking at the different house styles. We didn't mean to intrude. You're not intruding, Jessica said to the women, then turned back to Karen. But conducting real estate tours in my front yard without permission is completely inappropriate. Karen's smile got tighter. I was simply pointing out some of the maintenance challenges that come with larger properties. Sometimes people bite off more than they can chew when buying a house. My property is perfectly maintained according to all actual HOA guidelines, Jessica replied firmly. Well, that's a matter of opinion, Karen shot back. The board has received several complaints about various issues with your property. What complaints? From who? Karen waved her hand dismissively. That's confidential information, but I can tell you that multiple neighbors have expressed concerns. Jessica knew this was a lie. She'd become friendly with Mrs. Rodriguez, the Johnsons, and several other neighbors. None of them had any issues with her property. In fact, Mrs. Rodriguez had complimented her flower garden just the day before. After the women left, Jessica called her sister Lisa again. She's escalating, Jessica told her. Now she's bringing strangers to my house and bad-mouthing my property. Maintenance. I think she's trying to damage my reputation in the neighborhood. This is harassment, Lisa said bluntly. You need to document this and maybe talk to a lawyer. I've been documenting everything, but I'm worried about what she might do next. Her son's wedding is coming up in a few months and she seems more desperate every week. Jessica was right to be worried. The next week, she received an official-looking letter that made her blood run cold. It was on HOA letterhead and looked more formal than the usual violation notices. Notice of Property Standards Review, it read. Due to multiple ongoing violations and neighbor complaints, the Willowbrook Estates HOA Board will be conducting a comprehensive review of the property at 47 Maple Lane. Failure to address all identified issues may result in additional fines and potential legal action. Jessica read it 3 times, her hands shaking. The letter was signed by Karen as HOA president and 2 other board members she'd never heard of. She immediately called the HOA management company that was supposed to oversee the community. "I'm not showing any formal complaints filed against your property," the representative told her over the phone. "These violation notices you're describing sound unusual. Normally, we handle all official HOA business. So Karen can't just send me legal threats on her own. Board members can issue notices for legitimate violations, but a comprehensive property review would go through our office. I'd be happy to look into this for you." Jessica felt a small surge of hope. Maybe someone with actual authority would put an end to Karen's harassment campaign, but her hope was short-lived. The very next day, she came home to find Karen standing on her front porch with a clipboard, taking detailed notes and photos. "What are you doing?" Jessica demanded, getting out of her car. "Conducting the property standards review I mentioned in my letter," Karen replied without looking up from her clipboard. "I need to document all current violations before the board meeting next week. You can't just walk onto my property and conduct inspections without my permission." Karen finally looked up, and her expression was colder than Jessica had ever seen it. "As HOA president, I have the right to inspect properties for compliance issues. It's in the community bylaws." Jessica was pretty sure that wasn't true, but she didn't want to get into an argument on her front lawn where all the neighbors could see. "I want to see those bylaws," she said. "Of course, I'll be happy to provide you with the relevant sections after I complete my inspection." Jessica went inside and immediately called the management company again. This time she was transferred to a supervisor. "No, HOA board members cannot conduct unannounced property inspections," the supervisor confirmed. "That would require advance notice and usually the presence of a management company representative. What you're describing sounds like harassment. Can you help me stop this? We can certainly look into it. I'll need you to document everything and send us copies of all the violation notices you've received." That evening, Jessica spent hours scanning documents and writing a detailed timeline of Karen's behavior. As she organized everything, she realized just how crazy the situation had become. In less than 2 months, she'd received over 20 violation notices, had her property toured multiple times without permission, and been told by the HOA president that she should sell her house to make room for someone else's family. The next morning brought another surprise. Jessica found a handwritten note tucked under her doormat. "Jessica," it read, "I know my mother's been bothering you and I want to apologize. This whole situation is getting out of hand and I've tried to talk to her, but she won't listen. For what it's worth, I never asked her to do any of this. I found my own apartment across town and I'm perfectly happy there. I'm sorry you're dealing with this. Brandon." Jessica felt a mix of relief and sadness reading the note. Relief that Brandon wasn't part of his mother's scheme, but sadness that Karen was so obsessed with getting Jessica's house that she was willing to harass an innocent person and ignore her own son's wishes. She decided to keep the note as evidence, but it also gave her an idea. If Brandon was truly on her side, maybe there was a way to end this madness. But first, she had to survive whatever Karen was planning for the upcoming HOA board meeting. Jessica had a feeling it was going to be the biggest challenge yet. Jessica spent the weekend preparing for what she knew would be the fight of her life. She organized all her documentation, printed photos from her security camera, and even prepared a timeline of Karen's harassment. She wasn't going down without a fight. Monday morning started like any other day until Jessica heard sirens getting closer and closer to her street. She looked out her window and felt her heart drop into her stomach. 3 police cars were pulling up in front of her house. Jessica's hands were shaking as she opened the front door. 2 officers were walking up her driveway looking serious and official. "Ma'am, are you Jessica Chen?" the first officer asked. "Yes, that's me. Is everything okay?" We received a 911 call about a property dispute that requires immediate police intervention. The caller said there was an emergency situation involving illegal occupation of a residence. Jessica stared at them, completely confused. I'm sorry, what? Illegal occupation? This is my house. I have the deed and mortgage papers. The second officer looked at his notes. The caller claimed that someone was illegally living in a property that belongs to her family, and that the person was refusing to leave despite having no legal right to be there. Jessica's confusion turned to horror as she realized what had happened. Karen called you, didn't she? I can't discuss the identity of the caller, but we need to investigate any report involving potential trespassing or property disputes. Of course, come in. I can show you all my paperwork. Jessica invited the officers inside and quickly gathered her purchase documents, deed, mortgage statements, and home insurance papers. The officers reviewed everything carefully while Jessica explained the situation with Karen. So this Karen person is your HOA president? The first officer asked. Yes, and she's been harassing me for months trying to get me to sell my house to her son. I have documentation of everything she's done. Just then, Jessica heard familiar voices outside. Through her window, she could see Karen marching up the driveway with two other people she didn't recognize. Officers! Karen called out as she approached the front door. Thank goodness you're here. This situation has been going on for months. Jessica opened the door wider so the police could see Karen approaching. Ma'am, are you the person who made the 911 call? The second officer asked. Yes, I am. I'm Karen Blackwood, president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA. This woman has been illegally occupying a property that rightfully belongs to my son. The first officer looked at Karen with raised eyebrows. Ma'am, we've reviewed this woman's documentation. She clearly owns this property legally. She has a valid deed and mortgage. Karen's face flushed red. But she stole it from my son. He was supposed to buy this house, and she somehow got it instead through some kind of unfair bidding process. That's how real estate works, the second officer said patiently. Multiple people can bid on the same property. The highest bidder wins. That's completely legal. But my son needs this house. Karen's voice was getting higher and more desperate. He's getting married and starting a family. She doesn't even have children. Why does she need such a big house? Jessica watched in amazement as Karen completely lost her composure in front of the police officers. The two people with Karen, who Jessica assumed were the other HOA board members, looked deeply embarrassed. Ma'am, the first officer said firmly, property ownership doesn't depend on whether someone has children or not. This woman bought the house legally. She owns it. There's no crime here. But the HOA has rights, Karen insisted. We can force people to sell if they're not suitable for the community. No, you cannot, the officer replied. HOAs can enforce community rules about things like lawn maintenance and exterior decorations, but they cannot force someone to sell their legally owned property. Karen turned to Jessica with pure rage in her eyes. This isn't over. You don't belong here, and I will make sure everyone knows it. Ma'am, the second officer stepped between Karen and Jessica. What you just said sounds like a threat. I strongly advise you to leave this property immediately and avoid any further contact with this homeowner. You can't tell me what to do. I'm the HOA president. Right now you're someone on private property who was asked to leave. If you don't go voluntarily, we'll have to escort you off the premises. Karen finally seemed to realize how bad this looked. The other board members were already walking back toward the street, clearly wanting nothing to do with the situation. This is ridiculous, Karen muttered, but she started walking away. I was trying to help the community maintain its standards. After Karen left, the officers spent another few minutes with Jessica, taking down information about the harassment she'd been experiencing. You should consider filing a formal complaint, the first officer suggested. What she's doing sounds like harassment, and making false 911 calls is a crime. She actually called 911 over a property dispute? Jessica asked, still hardly believing it. Yes, and she claimed it was an emergency situation requiring immediate police response. That's misuse of emergency services, which can result in fines and other consequences. After the police left, Jessica sat in her living room, trying to process what had just happened. Karen had actually called 911 and claimed Jessica was illegally living in her own house. The audacity was breathtaking. Her phone started ringing almost immediately. It was Mrs. Rodriguez from next door. "Jessica, honey, are you okay? I saw the police cars in that awful scene with Karen." "I'm okay," Jessica said, though she was still shaking. "Karen called the police and told them I was illegally living in my house." "She did what?" Mrs. Rodriguez sounded shocked. "That woman has completely lost her mind. I've been living in this neighborhood for 8 years and I've never seen anything like this." Over the next hour, Jessica received calls from 3 other neighbors who had witnessed the police visit. All of them were supportive and outraged by Karen's behavior. Mrs. Johnson from 2 houses down even offered to be a witness if Jessica needed to file any legal complaints. "I should have spoken up sooner," Mrs. Johnson admitted. "Karen bullied my family when we first moved in too, but not to this extent. I was afraid to say anything because she's the HOA president." Jessica realized that Karen had probably been terrorizing other residents for years, but everyone had been too intimidated to speak up. Well, Jessica wasn't intimidated anymore. If anything, she was angry. That evening, she called the police station and filed a formal complaint about Karen's harassment and the false 911 call. She also contacted a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes to discuss her options. But the biggest surprise came the next morning. Jessica found an envelope in her mailbox with no return address. Inside was a short letter from Brandon. "Jessica," it read, "I heard about what happened yesterday and I'm horrified. I had no idea my mother had called the police. I've moved out of her house and told her that if she doesn't stop this harassment, I'll file a restraining order against her myself. I'm also going to the HOA management company to report her behavior. You shouldn't have to deal with this insanity. I'm truly sorry." Jessica felt a wave of relief reading Brandon's letter. At least someone in Karen's family had some sense. But she also felt sad for him, having to choose between supporting what was right and dealing with his mother's obsession. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was the HOA management company. "Ms. Chen, we've received several complaints about the incident yesterday, and we need to schedule an emergency review of Mrs. Blackwood's conduct as HOA president. Would you be available to speak with our board of directors this week?" Jessica smiled for the first time in days. "Yes, I'd be very available for that." Finally, someone with real authority was going to hold Karen accountable for her actions. Jessica had a feeling the tables were about to turn. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at the community center. Jessica had never been more nervous about anything in her life, but she was also determined to finally put an end to Karen's harassment campaign. She arrived early with a thick folder containing all her documentation. Photos, violation notices, timeline of events, witness statements from neighbors, and even screenshots from her security camera. If Karen wanted to play games, Jessica was ready to play back. The meeting room was packed. Jessica recognized most of her neighbors, including Mrs. Rodriguez, the Johnsons, and several other families from her street. What surprised her was seeing so many people she didn't know. Word had apparently spread throughout the entire community. Karen arrived exactly on time, dressed in a professional blazer and carrying her own folder. She looked confident and composed, nothing like the frantic woman who had screamed at police officers just a few days earlier. The HOA management company had sent their regional director, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Hayes, who looked like she'd seen every possible HOA drama over her 20-year career. "Good evening, everyone," Patricia began. "We're here tonight to address serious allegations regarding the conduct of your current HOA president, Karen Blackwood. This is an official review, and we'll be hearing from multiple parties." Jessica's heart was pounding as Patricia called her name first. "Ms. Chen, please tell us about your experiences since moving to Willowbrook Estates." Jessica stood up, her hands shaking slightly as she opened her folder. She started from the beginning. Karen's first visit, the inappropriate questions about needing such a big house, and the suggestion that she should move to make room for Brandon. As Jessica spoke, she could see neighbors around the room nodding and whispering to each other. When she got to the part about Karen conducting unauthorized property tours in her front yard, several people looked shocked. Over the past 3 months, Jessica continued, I've received 26 violation notices from Mrs. Blackwood. I've documented each one and can prove that most were either completely fabricated or for issues that don't actually violate any HOA rules. She held up photos showing her perfectly aligned house numbers, her regulation-compliant mailbox, and her well-maintained garden. The harassment escalated last Monday when Mrs. Blackwood called 911 and falsely reported that I was illegally occupying my own home. 3 police officers had to respond to what they confirmed was a completely baseless emergency call. A murmur went through the crowd. Several neighbors looked directly at Karen with disapproval. When Jessica finished, Patricia turned to Karen. Mrs. Blackwood, how do you respond to these allegations? Karen stood up with a bright smile, seemingly unbothered by everything Jessica had just said. I appreciate Ms. Chen's concerns, but I think there's been some misunderstanding about my role as HOA president. Everything I've done has been in the best interests of our community. She opened her own folder and pulled out several papers. Ms. Chen has indeed received violation notices, but they were all legitimate concerns brought to my attention by other residents. Which residents? Patricia asked. Karen hesitated for just a moment. Well, I can't reveal specific names due to privacy concerns, but multiple neighbors have expressed issues with various aspects of Ms. Chen's property maintenance. That's when Mrs. Rodriguez stood up. I'd like to say something, if I may. Patricia nodded. Please go ahead. I live right next door to Jessica, and I can tell you that her property is beautifully maintained. I've never heard a single neighbor complain about anything she's done. In fact, we've all been talking about how lovely her garden is. Mrs. Johnson stood up next. I'd like to add that Karen approached me last month asking if I had any complaints about Jessica's house. When I said no, she suggested I should pay closer attention to things like noise levels and property boundaries. It felt like she was fishing for problems that didn't exist. One by one, more neighbors stood up. The Patels from across the street, the Williams family from the corner house, even elderly Mr. Foster, who rarely spoke to anyone. All of them defended Jessica and described uncomfortable interactions with Karen, where she'd tried to get them to complain about Jessica's property. Karen's confident facade began to crack. These people don't understand the bigger picture. As HOA president, I have to think about property values and community standards. What about the 911 call? Patricia asked directly. Karen's face flushed. I felt there was a genuine emergency situation that needed immediate attention. You told police that someone was illegally occupying a property. Ms. Chen owns her home legally. How is that an emergency? Well, the situation had escalated to a point where I felt professional intervention was necessary. Patricia looked unimpressed. Mrs. Blackwood, calling 911 with false information is a criminal offense. It's also a serious abuse of your position as HOA president. The room was completely silent now. Everyone was watching Karen squirm under Patricia's questioning. I have here, Patricia continued, pulling out her own documents, a formal complaint filed by your son, Brandon Blackwood. He states that you've been harassing Ms. Chen without his knowledge or consent, and that you've been claiming he wants to buy her house when he's never expressed any such interest. Karen's mouth fell open. Brandon filed a complaint against me? He did. He also requested that we clarify that he has no interest in Ms. Chen's property, and asks that his name be removed from any future HOA correspondence regarding this matter. Jessica felt a surge of gratitude toward Brandon. She knew it must have been difficult for him to officially complain about his own mother, but his support meant everything. Patricia stood up, clearly ready to wrap up the meeting. Based on the evidence presented tonight, including documented harassment, abuse of HOA authority, filing false violation notices, and making a false emergency call to police, the management company is removing Karen Blackwood from her position as HOA president effective immediately. The room erupted in applause. Jessica felt tears of relief running down her cheeks. Furthermore, Patricia continued, Mrs. Blackwood is banned from serving in any HOA leadership capacity for the next 5 years. We'll be conducting a full review of all violation notices issued in the past 6 months to ensure no other residents have been unfairly targeted. Karen stood up abruptly, her face red with anger and embarrassment. This is ridiculous. You're all making a huge mistake. This community needs strong leadership, not someone who coddles people who don't belong here. She grabbed her folder and stormed toward the door, but turned back for one final outburst. You'll all regret this when property values start dropping, because we're not maintaining proper standards. With that, she left the meeting. Jessica never saw her again. 2 months later, Jessica was hosting her first neighborhood barbecue in her beautiful backyard. The new HOA president, Mr. Peterson, from Oak Street had stopped by to welcome her officially to the community leadership team. They'd asked her to join the beautification committee. Mrs. Rodriguez brought her famous potato salad, the Johnsons contributed homemade burgers, and even shy Mr. Foster showed up with a bouquet of flowers from his garden. As Jessica looked around, at her neighbors, her friends, laughing and enjoying themselves in the yard that Karen had insisted she didn't deserve, she felt incredibly grateful. Not just for her house, but for learning that sometimes you have to stand up for yourself to find out who your real community is. Brandon had moved to a different city for his new job, but he'd sent Jessica a card thanking her for handling the situation with grace and helping him realize how toxic his mother's behavior had become. Karen had quietly moved away shortly after losing her HOA position. Jessica heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd found a small condo in a community with no HOA at all. As the evening wound down and Jessica said goodbye to her neighbors, she stood on her front porch looking at her beautiful house. Every room was exactly as she'd dreamed it would be. Her garden was flourishing, her dogs were happy, and she finally felt like she truly belonged. Sometimes the best victories aren't about winning a fight. They're about discovering you were strong enough to stand up for yourself all along.